Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to another free monthly webinar from Smith School of Business. Today's topic, how to deliver on your company's 2022 strategy. I would say it's amazing to think that 2022 is only a few short months away. So we are clever to be strategizing about it now. My name is Meredith Dalt. I am your host. I'm a business journalist at Smith School of Business at Queen's University in Kingston. And as always, today's webinar is presented by Smith Business Insight and by Queen's Executive Education. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to remind you, as I always do, that today's discussion will be recorded. You will be receiving a link to that recording by email in a couple of days, so keep your eyes on your inbox for that. If you want to ask a question, and I strongly encourage you to do so, I hope that you'll use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So not the chat button. Please use the Q&A button because that will streamline the questions. The presentation will be the first part. Our speaker will present for the first part of today's hour, and then we'll go to questions. So get your questions in early, and we'll get to them in the second part of the presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Barry Cross. Barry is an assistant professor and distinguished faculty fellow of operations strategy at Smith School of Business and an expert and thought leader in innovation, execution, and operations strategy. He joined Smith School of Business after nearly 20 years in the automotive and manufacturing sectors with Magna Auto Systems and DuPont, where he led many key strategic initiatives. These include nearly 30 program launches in North America, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. Barry speaks and consults widely in the area of lean innovation, strategy projects, and execution, enabling organizations to create sustainable value for their customers. He is the best-selling author of 3 books, including Simple: Killing Complexity for a Lean and Agile Organization. Barry, it is wonderful to have you here with us today, and my pleasure to turn it over to you by muting myself and disappearing. I'll be back for the Q&A.
Thank you, Meredith, and welcome everybody. Welcome to our session here this afternoon. I'm going to get right into it. So we'll start by the requisite comment about sharing screen. And as I do that, I want to acknowledge the great work and all the digging done by my research assistant, Quinn Fotheringham, in pulling together some of this material. So here we are, move stuff around a little bit and bring that to life. There we are. All right, so what we're talking about obviously is the concept of bringing our strategy together next year. And many of your organizations right now are spending a lot of time and resources with the right people around the team, trying to understand what's happening in the market and how the pandemic's going to resolve itself and really what that means for the organization going forward. Public sector, private, healthcare, education, hospitality, retail, really doesn't matter. We're all kind of in the same boat this way and trying to map out what happens over the next 12, 15 months for the organization. It's not about stopping there either, because obviously the most important part of that and really why your customers come to you is the execution, the deliverance of that particular strategy. So I want to start with a bit of a question, and in many ways, the session that we've got here this afternoon is going to feel seminar style, in that it feels like it's a little bit of back and forth, a little Q&A, and interactive as best we can through a Zoom, call it virtual environment here. The question I want you to think about is, has the user experience diminished out there in society right now? And it's interesting. I've had this kind of conversation with a number of different people, but a colleague down at Texas A&M University would say, Barry, you're out of your mind. Of course, the experience has not diminished. If you go back to the 1960s, there were maybe 10,000 bank branches across North America. Now there's over 80,000. You can deposit a check instantly instead of having to wait in line. You can bank from basically anywhere with your mobile device, so to speak. You think about telephone calls, and now they're widely accessible. They're a lot less expensive, and you can make a call again from anywhere. The graphics that I've got on the screen here, the effects of Uber and related apps on transportation over traditional taxi services. The in-flight experience, far safer, far more enjoyable, and in fact, widely accessible again by society. So you look at the broad range of user experiences out there, and he says, Barry, like I said, you're out of your mind, right? How can you think that the user experience is diminished? Well, flip it around for a minute and think about it maybe that our access has increased, but has the experience itself really improved over the years? And really today, has our user experience, has our service economy really delivered what we expect, or has it not? Is it that we're less tolerant as a society than we ever have been in the past, and there's reasons for that? Or has the quality of those service encounters diminished in recent years? All right, so that's the premise that I want to lay here for us. And really what we're going to do is consider perhaps the general decline, and we've got some statistics to support that, easy for me to say. But more importantly, we're going to focus on really what we do about it, how we can start to resolve and improve at least our position within our given marketplace. All right, so think about what we'll call for now this trend towards mediocrity, and there's lots of interesting examples out there. Those of you who follow the media are familiar with some of the things, say, United Airlines has done in recent years. Going back, a decade or so, there's a widely viewed video on YouTube called United Breaks Guitars, where a band member saw his $3,000 Martin guitar getting trashed outside the airplane window. A couple of years ago, there was a doctor, I think in Philadelphia, that was dragged kind of kicking and screaming off a United flight because of overbooking practices. And more recently, a young girl, I think she was 10 years old, who was traveling alone. Her parents put her on a plane in California. She connected through O'Hare in Chicago and was going down to a camp of some sort in Indiana. The camp calls mom and dad and says, hey, your daughter hasn't arrived. So of course they call United and they call O'Hare and say, where's our child? And, some, less than responsive support and service through that whole process without going through the whole thing. But most of that's out in the mainstream media at this point. This one here, and this one's interesting because I know there's a lot of fans out there for Starbucks. And in fact, they're in 76 countries. They make 8,000 cups of coffee basically every minute. But in your minds, once again, has the user experience diminished with people like Starbucks? Is it truly worth that $5 that we're spending on that particular beverage? Or has, say, $5 for that coffee-like beverage become a bit of a commodity to the point where we just are trained as society to say, yeah, it's going to be $5 and it's kind of right? So that's kind of the backdrop behind what we're using here to explain some of these specific challenges that are going on. All right, here's some of that data. Now it's interesting, you can look at the leadership perspective inside of many of these organizations, and in most cases, and it'll seem justifiable, but our leaders believe that they are doing a great job, that their organizations are providing what we'll call superior service. Now, Bain Consulting did a survey this way a few years ago, and Bain had what I'll call an 80 versus 8 ratio. They surveyed something like 2,000 organizations across North America, and what they heard back was that 80% of these organizations and their leadership teams believe that they're providing superior service to their customers. Well, Bain said, that seems like a really big number for me, for us here. 80% superior service. Let's just follow up on that. So they talked to the customers of those same organizations. And what they found was that only 8% of customers believe they're receiving superior service. And Bain says, well, that seems to make a lot more sense to us. And there's a number of other surveys and pieces of data out there from HBR and other organizations like we see here on the screen that basically say that most organizations believe they are highly effective in, honestly, the execution of their strategy, where they're creating value. And one of the metrics that they use to measure that is, call it the loyalty effect of their customers. Down the bottom part of the screen here, where we look at loyalty as an indicator of how good a job we're doing. Well, again, Starbucks has 14 million members who are in the Starbucks loyalty program, getting that free coffee on their birthday. And Tim Hortons has their apps. It seems like everybody's got a loyalty program. But if you take a step back from that, in many cases, those loyalty programs just provide a benefit that's worth me signing up for. Is that true loyalty? Is it true enthusiasm? Is it a true measure of superior service? Right? That's when we're saying, well, let's just see what the customers say. So that 8% from Bain, 8% of us believing we receive superior service, well, we're seeing that in other pieces of data as well. 84% of consumers say their expectations are not met. And that's going across the board in many, many different service encounters and industries that are out there. So it really gets down to saying, okay, if this is the data, if this is the situation within industry, perhaps, let's just accept that for now, we may not be doing as good a job as we think we are. And I want to take a step back again from the pandemic environment that we're in. And, there's lots of posts, lots of signs out there, be patient, be supportive of the services. And I absolutely agree with that. But at the same time, we are still responsible as an organization to bring our vision to life, to execute. So that's what we're here about. So if you look at the data, right, if we're not maybe doing as good a job as we thought, I like to say that we've got one of two types of problems. We either have a people problem or we've got a process problem. And you know what? For the most part, you've got pretty good people. So that really gets down to the idea of potentially having some process challenges that we want to focus on and dive in just a little bit deeper here in a minute. But if we look at that data that we just saw and we say, well, if so many organizations are maybe not doing as well as we thought, how is it that they are still in business? How is it that they are successful? So one of the things, and a very smart guy in the area of execution and strategy, his name's Michael Hammer. He likens it to a demographic effect. And he says, you know what, it may not be an exaggeration to say that most of our growth and prosperity economically over the last 200 years is a result of demographics. And, even here in North America, our population has gone up by 25 million people over the last 10 years. And yeah, so there's a lot more traffic out there. And our customer, one of the things we know is that our customer enthusiasm is only as good as the fact there's not somebody better next door. So if most of the organizations are kind of doing a good job, then yeah, I'll probably stay with who I am. Are you in business to do a good job, or are you in business to put a smile on somebody's face? Are we in a business to really draw somebody to our local environment? For me, it's Kingston. Are we in the business to bring more people to Kingston and make them want to come back to Kingston and to patronize some of the stores that the retail industry, the small mom and pop type shows, some of the other tourist attractions that we've got in the area? Well, we're only going to do that by being best, by being great. And that's what's going to bring them back again and again and again. All right, so as I said, we've either got a people problem or a process problem. And you know what? Let's figure out how we got here. Some of you will recognize this, but as the great David Byrne said, well, how did we get here? Well, challenge number one is that in many cases, if we do have a process problem, nobody in the organization actually owns that process. Right? Maybe somebody's accountable for the department that process resides in. But if you look around the room and you said, who owns that process? Right? We're going to get a lot of blank stares. Nobody actually owns a particular process and challenge. And in fact, many of our organizations lack the process analysis and optimization skills to actually fix some of those particular challenges. Let me give you a really quick example. This is just a basic 3-station process. And I'm going to ask you to put your thinking hats on here for just a minute. And let's assume that we've got a lineup of customers. We've got an endless supply of customers that want to come in. This 3-station process has varying cycle times. The first question is, how long does it take for one individual to get through that process? What's our throughput time? All right, so have a look at that and think about it for a minute. And you're going to do the basic math associated with that. And you're going to say, okay, well, that's 60 seconds, right? Fairly straightforward. Now, the next question is, okay, if it's 60 seconds for my cycle time, sorry, for my throughput time, how many customers can I serve in 1 hour? And again, your quick math and okay, 60-second throughput time, many people are going to say, well, I could serve 60 customers in that hour. When in fact, the correct answer is 120 customers. And then you'd look at that and you'd say, well, how do you get to 120? Well, that comes from our bottleneck, which is right here in the middle of that station 2. And the bottleneck determines the pace of your process. It determines the number of customers that you can serve in any particular process environment like this. It could be Subway, it could be, the check-in counter at the local hotel. The bottleneck determines your pace. And in this case, we can serve a customer basically every 30 seconds. So that's 120 an hour. The next question, just to have a bit of fun with this. If I was to make station number 1 faster, does that have any positive impact on my process? Right? And no, it doesn't. That has absolutely no effect. All you're going to do is have more customers accumulate before station 2. Station 3, same question. Does that have any positive effect on my process? No, right? You still have one person coming out at the end of that line every 30 seconds. The only way to have a measurable impact on this particular business unit is to resolve the bottleneck that we've got here in station 2. Now, we're not, focusing on people's skills or anything here other than illustrating the fact that that particular discussion, that particular piece of analysis is something that many, many organizations around us are not comfortable with. They don't have the skills to be able to dig into that process and analyze how to make it better. They know that over there in the organization, they have a process challenge. We don't have the skills to be able to fix it. Right? And as we walk through this, it's obviously not very complicated. So the next part of that, let me just go to the next one. One of the bottlenecks or constraints that we end up with in many of these organizations as well, a very common problem, is that we end up with too many products, too many processes. We get productized basically to death. One of my favorite examples, and this leads to obviously high levels of complexity in the business, and I'll talk about the survey data here in just a minute. Maple Leaf Foods, and I've been kind of having some fun with these guys for a number of years, and they've since resolved these challenges. But you go back a few years, and there's a interesting article published in the Globe and Mail. Many of you have heard me talk about this in the past, but at the time, Maple Leaf Foods was focusing on how to make their setups a little bit faster. And you look over on the side of the screen here, and you see one of those setups where they're cleaning and sterilizing the equipment so they can change from recipe number 1 to recipe number 2. They wanted to make that faster, right? Sounds great. They're spending 45 minutes on one of these change-ups, setups. So the consultants were kind of poking around. They evaluated that process, and then they said, but we have another question for you. We can absolutely fix your setups. But the question we have is, how many different hot dog recipes do you have at Maple Leaf Foods? And they had to dig up the answer, and they found the answer was 77. They had 77 flavors of hot dogs, and changing from recipe 47 to 63 back to number 15 was leading to far more setups than were actually necessary. So your productization, your product proliferation, your process proliferation is actually adding layers of complexity to your business that start to bog you down. And part of a survey that we ran here at the school a few years back, we found that nearly 70% of us as leaders in our various organizations believe that our businesses are too complex. We have too much of this stuff going on. Again, talking to the customers of those same organizations, we find that our customers understand less than half of the stuff that we do, right? Which is a huge opportunity for us to kind of distill that down into the fabric, the processes and services and products that are essential. That's where we can really create value. That's what I want you to think about. All right, so that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 is more interesting, right? The first one is something that's really part of us, part of all of us. But challenge number 2 is where we're not necessarily focusing on the user experience. And the real core message there is that our processes in many cases are designed for us as opposed to the customer. And I'm not talking, these are some fun images that I found out there. It's not the ATM machine that's 8 feet in the air, or these random structural posts that are, in our various hallways. It's some of those processes where we are serving distinct customers, but the process serving that customer is dysfunctional because it's not actually targeted at the customer. All right, so what do I mean? What's Barry talking about here? Think about our bus schedule. And for those of us in the room here, go back to high school for a minute and think about what time the bus picked you up in the morning. And in most cases, if that was at all within the last, call it 40 years, when they started to modify busing schedules for a couple of different reasons, that bus likely picked you up at somewhere around 7:30 in the morning. And you think about, okay, well, why is that? Well, obviously what they're trying to do is to optimize the bus schedule. They cut down the number of buses by half, and they created 2 routes. Where route number 1 is for the high school students. We're going to get them to school by kind of 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we're going to go and pick up all the elementary schools to get them to school by kind of 9 o'clock in the morning. All right. So cost, optimization of the schedule, less capital investment. So overall, it was serving a number of different masters. And then after school jobs and sports and everything else started to build on that schedule so that when high school students get out of school at around 2:30, they go to work or they go to football practice or whatever it is after school. So our lives inside of that process were driven by a cost-focused schedule. Now, here's our question. Who's our customer, right? Who is the customer in this scenario of that particular busing schedule? And we can say the local board, we can say the parents, we can say society, but ultimately, school is in place to serve the students. And right around puberty, and we all know this, but right around puberty, our bodies go through a massive change to the point where high school age students, call it 15 to 18 or 19, maybe into their 20s, are up far later at night, and their sleep pattern is drastically adjusted to the point where they are not functioning properly. And this is well documented until 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, classes start at 8:20 or 8:30, and the first class is physics. All right, right after that, they have calculus class. And their minds and bodies are not prepared for that class based on the process that's not been designed for them. All right, so interesting. So what we're doing, what some states down in the US are doing, they're actually flipping this around and they're trying alternative schedules to the point where we're going to think of the students as our customer. So the elementary school age children are getting picked up first, high school students an hour later. And the early results of that particular research are showing far higher scores and test results on standardized testing, right? Interesting. Processes designed for us and not our customers. Here's another example. And we could talk about healthcare here all day with some of these examples. And I need to highlight the fact that this is not in any way targeting practitioners. They are some of the hardest working, most amazing people in society. And we're very, very grateful to have them. But some of the processes within their operating environment are very much designed for the institution as opposed to patients. And that's what I want to highlight here. You look at beds, for example, inside of the hospital, and most of those beds are up pretty high. I don't know what the height is, kind of 28, 30 inches, whatever. And you think about why those beds are up at that particular height. Obviously, a $4,000 bed, it could be whatever height it needs to be. Well, that's for the practitioner. That's to ease the conversation with the patient, to facilitate the interaction, whether it's blood pressure, heart rate, administration of medication, that type of stuff. It's to facilitate treating that patient more effectively. Well, one of the leading causes of patient falls in hospitals, especially among the elderly, is bed height and getting in and out of bed. These higher beds, and they're getting out of bed, they're trying to put their slippers on and they're tipping over. They're a lot less stable than they used to be. Well, if we lower the beds and focus on the patient interaction in this case, then that would start to reduce the number of falls. Now, there's a smart guy, his name's Dr. Samir Sina. He's at Mount Sinai in Toronto, and he's proposed this whole new acute care for elderly strategy at Mount Sinai, and it's really paid off. Reducing the amount of time patients are spending in hospitals, reducing the falls, increasing social interaction, everything else. He's designed his entire ward around the patient experience. You make it sound, or when you hear that, it sounds like it's going to be more expensive. Well, it actually saves Mount Sinai $6 million a year and reduces the length of stay by 23%. So we're actually increasing the capacity inside of that ward. Patients are checking out. They're not needing to come back, reducing our costs. And all he did was create a patient-centric environment within some of the procedures and services that they're providing already. Right, there's other ones like this. There's a phenomenon called alarm fatigue, where when some of the sensors start to tweak inside of any of these wards in the hospital, alarms start to sound, beeping starts to sound. Well, the practitioners naturally get weary of that sound, and that leads to delays in response. And there was something like 500 deaths in US hospitals between 2005 and 2008 as a result of the process associated with that alarm. Another one called the July effect, where the summer months are when we recruit fresh graduates out of medical school, right? That makes sense. They're finishing up. They want to start paying off some of that debt that they've accrued. Well, right off the bat, they're receiving responsibility beyond some of their experience to be able to treat. And as a result of that particular recruiting and training process, mistakes are something like 10% higher through the summer months than they are in other months of the year. So Again, a series of, again, processes that are affecting our ability to serve customers well, because they're not designed for those processes across basically any industry. Here's one just for a bit of fun. You look at over the last year in the NHL, obviously with the shortened season and no fans in the stands, they said, well, how else can we start to drive revenue? How else can we bring, and maintain our connection with our customers? So they came up with these reverse retro jerseys. Those are good looking shirts, right? And they sold a ton of these things. Typically, the executives in any one of these organizations may talk about how something looks, or some other, call it, element of that product or services behavior or performance. You think about this again, who is the customer in this scenario? Well, ultimately it's the fans in the stands and even some of the commentators. The challenge with these reverse retro jerseys, at least in Toronto, were that the numbers were almost invisible to the commentators and to the fans who were there from elevated heights. And you look down in the corner here and you really can't tell exactly what some of those numbers are. They were very difficult for read. Commentators talked about it, fans commented, I don't know who I'm watching now. And that made it more challenging. So again, the processes, or in this case, sometimes the product design, is affecting our service or our customer experience because they're not designed for the customers, right? They're designed for us or for other purposes. So that's the type of stuff that we have to realize and appreciate. And I just put this one up for fun, but hey, look at that. Toronto's being outscored by Edmonton, 1-0. So when we look at what's next, or how we got here, right? This is where, when we realize that some of these phenomena are taking place inside of our organizations, we say, okay, well, does that really matter? It seems like, as I said, we're busier than we've ever been. Well, I want you to go back to that comment from Michael Hammer and recognize and appreciate that, a good chunk of our success right now may not be a result of perhaps how good we are, but the demographics associated with what's going on in society. So it's important to realize that while we're developing those strategies, those plans for next year, while we're putting plans in place to execute and bring those to life, let's think about now being the right time to deal with some of this stuff. Let's think about how we can start to challenge some of the existing status quo within even our own organizations and say, okay, yeah, maybe it's the time. Maybe this is the time to fix it. So one of the things that, there's a couple of stats here I want to point out to you, or call it pieces of research. Our behavioral habits form in as little as 21 to 28 days, so 3 to 4 weeks. Right, interesting by itself, but right now it's even more important because to a massive extent, your customers' behaviors have changed. Their habits have changed over the last year and a half. People are behaving, they're reacting, they're interacting far differently than they ever have before. So whatever habits they had previously associated with you and your organization are probably wildly different than what they have been and what they are going to be a year from now. And we've got an opportunity now to start to shift those habits back in our favor. Our habits change in as little as 3 to 4 weeks, right? That number surprised me when I heard it. The second thing I want you to think about, and I invite you to throw this phrase out in your next management conversation, it's called the habit discontinuity hypothesis, right? Well, according to the habit discontinuity hypothesis, what we know about that hypothesis is that the best time for change is when we're already changing some other stuff. And this is when you've been changing all kinds of this stuff around your organization. You have undergone massive amounts of change as a business, as a public sector organization and entity, as a business school, everything else. We've undergone all kinds of change. Well, as it turns out, that's when people are most receptive to changes, when they're already changing things. Let's deal with that process. Let's instill a behavior where we're holding people accountable for the outcomes of some of those processes, some of those operations within the business. Now is the time, because they're already changing. Otherwise, you know what it's like, people don't like new ideas, they don't like change. Well, the fact that they're already changing is going to make it easier for you. So let's fix it now. All right, so what do we do about it? And I need you to leave with some takeaways as we start to wrap this up here. You've heard the old adage, give a man a fish, well, teach a man a fish, teach a person to fish, and they will basically eat for life. Well, some of the actual takeaways here, number one, core to being able to resolve your process challenges, to target customers in your processes rather than the organization internally focused processes, is to know who that customer is. So who are you targeting? Who is the entity that you're trying to service? Is it the students on our high school buses? Is it the elderly in our hospital? Is it the fans and the commentators watching our game? But who is that particular customer? Let's understand who they are. Let's understand their behaviors, their needs, and how those needs and behaviors may change over the next coming months. And let's position ourselves to be able to deliver an effective process for them at that point, right? That seems to make sense. So number one, who is the customer? The second part of that, and this seems, a little bit like motherhood or obvious in some ways, but somebody has to own that process. And this is where you need to be able to look around the organization and say, you or whatever, I need you to basically take it. If you can't find that individual, then it may be you. But somebody has to own that process and understand, again, how it connects with that particular customer. What's wrong with it? Look for the constraints, look for the bottlenecks, look for the opportunities to start to create value inside of that process. Some of the basic tools that I use, I sometimes say that email makes you stupid. Well, Post-it notes make you smarter, and they really do. They give you the ability to visualize, particular processes, and you see what's gone on the screen here in the wall. But the wall on your screen. But you're using one task per Post-it note, and you map out that process flow, and you get people's consensus. Is that really the way that we're doing that right now? And what happens if we move that around? What happens if we actually get rid of that particular step? And it gives you incredible amounts of visibility on that process and the ability to start to resolve it, make it better. All right. So that's really, inside of a short webinar, the type of activity and thought process, and even the mindset that I want you to have around your organizations. This stuff, it's incredible how much of this is what we call that low-hanging fruit, and being able to look around and, us, even as a business school, we've got a number of these same kind of challenges, and just being able to say, okay, now's the time to deal with some of these opportunities that are in front of us. All right. Now, all of that being said, did you catch the head fake? All right. And really the core message or the core theme behind this is the idea of lean. And lean for me is really the idea of resource allocation. And one of your most important responsibilities as leadership in your organizations is the allocation of scarce resources. That's all lean is. Lean is people can say it's a philosophy that gets this kind of Zen mentality around many organizations, and others it gets a bit of a bad reputation. Well, all lean is about the allocation of resources. And the more effectively you do that, the more value you're going to be able to create for your customers and your clients. How's my time? We're in good shape here. How to personalize this, how to make it, call it relevant to your organization. Just think recently, especially, about the number of hours that are spent around the organization dealing with, call it customer challenges. Whether it's, something was delivered inappropriately, or something, the food wasn't quite hot, or some other challenges that we have in the organization. Those challenges are consuming your time. They're consuming resources around the organization. And at the root of it, again, is not people, right? You've got good people for the most part. It's really about the process. You have a challenged process that's bogging down and call it destroying value for particular customers, right? Think about what would happen or what you could do with those resources if you resolve just a couple of those process challenges, right? The second part, what would you do with some of that time? And that's where you start to make it real. You start to say, well, what would I do with an extra 1 hour every week? What would I do with an extra 60 minutes, right? And sometimes we get a bit of that kind of dreamy look in our eyes, and we say, wow, an extra hour a week, that'd be amazing. My students tell me they would sleep. That would get them an extra hour of sleep, right? And I get that. Other people would say, well, maybe I'd work out a little more, or I'd eat healthier. We all know that, eating more healthily takes more time and a little more money at the same time as well, right? So maybe that's what I'd do. Leaders in organizations say I'd spend more time with my customers, or I'd spend more time with my suppliers, or walking around the shop floor, or just interacting and engaging with my employees and asking them, how things are going, and, how can I help them, make it better, right? So what would you do with that hour, right? And then it's really up to you to go find that hour inside of your processes and start to, allocate resources effectively in that particular direction. All right. So with that, I want to wrap up with a Peter Drucker quote. Many of you have heard of Peter Drucker, old-time management guru, sadly passed away a few years ago. But Drucker used to say, there's nothing so useless as doing more efficiently something we shouldn't be doing at all, right? Which is kind of a neat phrase, right? When you think about it, we want to focus on making the processes better, but I also want you to watch out for some of the processes that we could actually shut down and eliminate. And imagine what happens, how much of a resource bump we get in that situation. So with that, we'll turn it back to Meredith. Here's my coordinates here. If anybody has any questions or follow-up or anything like that, I'm happy to talk. Otherwise, Meredith, thank you. Back to you.
Hello, Barry. Thanks. That was fantastic. And we have some excellent questions from the audience. I'm going to launch right into them while you close your presentation. There we are. So the first question is from Natalie. It's quite specific. So what is the best way to collect data from customers to build service blueprints? Aggregate data platforms and Veronic's surveys focus groups we are trying to form a data collection strategy to build our customer journeys. Any thoughts for Natalie?
Yeah, Natalie, great question. Obviously, you've got access to data already, which puts you ahead for that question from many organizations. Organizations without access to data, quite often it's just a matter of putting some people in the room and starting to think like the customer, bringing a few customers in. We used to, dress up a dummy and put the dummy in a chair in the room with us with a suit on, and that dummy represented the voice of the customer if we didn't have access to other perspectives. And very often that made us think that way. In your case, you've got access to data, and the risk there is that we start to boil the ocean, where we say, okay, we've got so much data. The best place to start to your question, again, is to understand who that customer is that we're targeting. And then you can start to distill down some of that data to the point where it's particular to that, are we targeting tourists, or are we targeting the older demographic, or are we targeting, people who shop almost exclusively online? Get us, right down to the behaviors of these people. What do they drive? What do they, how do they entertain themselves? Is it most of their entertainment related to their devices, or is it, broad-based outdoor enthusiast type? The better you define that particular target customer that you're after, the better you're going to be able to filter through some of that data to get to some type of meaningful customer insight.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. At one point you talked about customer expectations, and GC writes, have customer expectations become unreasonable? I know there are exceptions, but for most transactions, are people expecting too much? How can we manage what may be unrealistic expectations?
Well, GC, I would echo there's been a pretty significant shift here, and part of that's related to the internet. I can get instant answers to my question. I can order stuff and it arrives tomorrow. That whole side of things, I believe, has unfairly for many organizations shifted customer behaviors and beliefs to the point where I believe that, call it, instant service is appropriate. Therefore, I also believe that as a society, we become a lot less patient. Having said that, how do we kind of manage through that process? How do we understand what's appropriate for us? At the end of the day, there's still a level of accountability that's expected. So while we appreciate that some of our customer demands and perspectives are unfair, I think for the most part, society does a pretty good job understanding that this is not one of those instant services. This is not one of those, call it, convenience elements. This one is more experiential. This one is more, call it, focused, the particular offering we've got. So within your organization and the other organizations in our collective room here, never forget that at the end of the day, we're still accountable. So while society's behavior may have shifted a little bit, we are still expected to deliver. We are still expected to bring that value to life and do the best we can at it. And the last kind of thought that way, as I started off today, none of us really got into business to be good enough. We all started an organization because it was something we're passionate about, or we joined a company because we believed that they could create value. The only way we do that is with a relentless pursuit towards some idea of best. And whatever that bestness is up to you. but that's got to be the core theme for us.
Okay, but the customer is still always right, it sounds like.
They may be right, but they also, you know what, that sometimes our customers are a bit unreasonable. And as I said, you know, I think people have done a very good job reminding people to be tolerant, to be patient, you know, among everything else that we've been doing over the last 18 months, but it's still on the organization to deliver.
Right. Okay. At one point in your presentation, you said there are people problems and process problems, and mostly we have good people. Anne writes, I think we do have a people problem too. I can't believe the number of companies I've contacted lately whose call centers say I may wait longer than usual because they don't have enough staff. What is the problem and the answer?
The problem, it's interesting when you start to see some of the shifts right now that are going on. This is obviously a pretty broad issue, but you know, how many people do you know who have, say, retired? They retired with what seems like perfect timing right at the start of the pandemic. And while they may not have been able to do some of the stuff that they wanted to do in retirement yet, they also got out of, call it the chaos associated with adapting. There's a lot of people who aren't coming back. There's a lot of people who, you know, who've been working from home, and as things start to return to home, they're saying, okay, you know what, I'm just going to hang it up. I've got enough. I've realized I could live on a lot less than maybe I did. And the number of people actually exiting the workforce right now is substantial, or the number of people, say, moving out of larger centers is significant. And what that means is, yeah, you know, many of these organizations do have a staffing problem or a capacity problem. The people that you've got are still good, but you may not have enough of them. That's a real issue. What do we do about it? Right, Natalie, or sorry, I love this question, because what it's highlighting is that I need to be able to resolve some of the other inefficiencies and process challenges around my organization, because I need to be able to amp up my capacity with probably the same number of people. I'm going to struggle to get more people, right? And it's funny, right here in Kingston, you know, there's Tim Hortons signs that said, hey, you know, we're hiring $17 an hour. You know, McDonald's $21 an hour. And there's got to be some kind of crazy signing bonus to bring these people in. You get a 60-pack of Timbits or something like that. But this is society-wide right now. It's not going away anytime soon. So all the more important for us to focus on resolving some of these process challenges we've got internally.
Okay, that's good advice. Thank you. All right, Raheem writes with a very specific question around process ownership. I mentioned that no one person owns the process. I agree. The problem, we are not hiring enough. We're not hiring process specialists. So existing employees feel they're already overworked and don't want to take on a new process. So how do you handle that?
There still needs to be, even if there's no, call it dedicated assignment of process responsibility, there needs to be the process guru in the organization, somebody who just understands some of this stuff. It could be Raheem, it could be you know, one of his team members, and these are people that it's generally going to take that fresh pair of eyes, somebody looking at it from kind of a different angle than the people who are engaged and entrenched inside of that particular operation in the business. So somebody who's able to take a step back, but we've still got to have the ability to look at it and identify some of those opportunities. So in those organizations where you don't actually have somebody assigned, if you've got the ability and it fits within your structure, then yeah, assign somebody formally. They will absolutely pay for themselves. You know, this is not going to cost you money. It's not adding unnecessary headcount. They will pay for themselves. In those organizations that are a smaller, you know, maybe more of an agile type structure, then you need to make sure that among the skill sets that you're developing or recruiting for right now, somebody's got to come in with that type of a mindset, that kind of process guru who's going to be able to look and say, you know, what's going on over here? Let's fix that.
Right.
Good question, Raheem. Thank you.
And a question has come in about specifically about the buses, the segment you did on school buses and students. So interesting thought on buses, thinking of students as the customer for buses is an evolutionary thought for some school boards and bus companies. In my school district, the school boards think they are the customer because they are paying the bill, and it's about getting the students to the school as cheaply as possible. It's amazing how you can get different outcomes by reframing the question. Do you think some businesses don't think about their customers correctly?
I guarantee that's a fact. Yeah, and a very appropriate observation that you've made with that question. When you start to look at it and appreciate that many of our processes are designed for us. You know, for instance, how would we process a transaction? How would we pay a bill even? How would we serve that customer? You know, my friend Don, you know, one of my mentors, just an awesome guy. I've known him forever. I used to say, you know, Barry, this would be great business if it wasn't for the customers. and he was saying it very much tongue in cheek, but we're guilty in many ways as leadership inside of these organizations of kind of forgetting about why we're here. And ultimately, you know, for buses, that's an enabler for a system to enhance the overall education level within society. That's what schools are for. Schools are supposed to raise the bar. And if we're basically diminishing the potential of that first hour of classes in high school, you know, with subjects that are core to where they're going when they graduate, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. So again, the sooner we recognize as an organization exactly who those customers are and start to put value in understanding that relationship, that gives us a perspective and even some momentum within the company to start to resolve some of those process challenges.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Barry. In case anyone sees a tail, my cat, this is the perils of working from home. My cat is also just joined us. So, okay. What are your thoughts on planning and implementation of a strategy where the organization is geographically located around the world?
So good question. And one of the things that we talk about, we run an execution program, kind of 4 days, and a big part of it gets to be, how do we start to personalize the vision and strategy? How do we bring it to life for the various entities? For single entity organizations, single facility organizations, it's simple, right? We bring in some pizza and we tell everybody, this is where we're going, this is your role. In those more geographically diverse organizations, you need to be able to give yourself some time. And what I advocate is that our plan is wrapped up, blessed, and approved at least 2 months before the end of our current fiscal year. So if you've got a January 1st fiscal year, basically next week, you better have that plan wrapped up. You know, the budget stamped, the board approval is there, because you're going to need that 2 months to put on you know, the old euphemism is the dog and pony show. We're going to get around to all the various locations, you know, and today we're blessed by being able to do some of that by Zoom. Some of those locations you want to get to in person, but you've got to deliver the vision, the strategy, where we're going, and just as importantly, what it means to you, to your role, and why we're so excited about this, and be able to give people a sense of how they are participating, supporting, and actually owning part of that plan going forward. So, you know, the geography just really just means time. So right. This is a bit of accelerating the planning process so that I can start to set up the execution of it a little bit later down the road.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. Where are we? Alvin, do you think the pandemic has changed processes with tech playing a bigger role? And has the pandemic also changed your customer definition?
The tech side, yeah, I think what you've found is that more organizations are accelerating their digital strategy. And digital, I'll preface that by saying I misspoke there. It's not as much a strategy by itself, but an enabler for other parts of your strategy. So where I'm using digital tools to start to transform or enable different parts of the business, they realized, you know, while they've been kind of backburnering that for, I don't know, months or years or whatever, they said, well, now we have to, because our customers are distant to us. So the second part of Alvin's question, where you start to highlight the customers changing, in say a Kingston environment where most of our customers have been local, have been students, you know, for the better part of a year, we were missing 20,000 customers in many of those businesses around the city. Right. And therefore, okay, now how do I start to tap into others? How do I, you know, connect with some of the tourists who've come in the past? And there's that, call it digital strategy, where all of a sudden we need that online platform that we've been able to get by without in the past. So it's interesting, the catalyst for change, the catalyst for driving a lot of these types of discussions, you know, it can be economic, interest rates, exchange rates, price of oil, whatever, it can be environmental, and catalysts like the pandemic come along infrequently, and organizations need to be able to capitalize on that crisis while it's here, because it's probably moving many of us in the direction that we had to anyway.
Oh, good point. And it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
Well, here we are still holding virtual webinars, right? So,
well, interestingly, we didn't start doing these webinars regularly until the pandemic. We started in March 2020, and now they've become something we offer and seem to have value for our customers. So,
and it resonates. And just while you're on that topic, I'm looking forward to be able to have these presentations and discussions back live with their friends and our alumni here in the very near future. So hopefully that happens.
Yes, I hope so too. Question from Laura, since we've still got, let's say 7 minutes or so till we wrap. When looking at business process management, what are your thoughts at a centralized versus decentralized approach?
Good. If I have processes across, multiple departments or even locations that are very similar, I want to centralize the ownership of those processes to make sure that I've got people doing it basically the same way. If I can improve the process, do that, right? And I want your ideas, I want to make it better, but I want to make sure that to start with, everybody's kind of doing it the same way so that we engage in kind of a uniform level of delivery. But then when somebody improves it, I want to roll that out across those departments or entities as well. And that's where the centralization opportunity creates value for us. If I don't have multiple versions of similar processes, the value that a centralized service or control function provides is that it gives me the tools. I think it was Raheem's question earlier, where we looked at, if I don't have the resources, well, if you've got a centralized function, you probably have some people that are trained in that, whether they're, call it Six Sigma black belts, or they're lean gurus, or just good process optimization specialists. There's value in that structure. It generally always pays for itself, especially in distributed enterprises. Don't feel like you have to have that though if you're a smaller entity, if some of the smaller SME type businesses in our audience today. As long as you've got the expertise in-house, worry about having the skills before you worry about putting structure to it, which may come down the road.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, then Jordan's question, which follows, may tie in. Can you provide some advice on how detailed to get into your processes as you look to improve on existing processes? Are there times when you want to do a higher level view, detailed? How do you determine the right approach?
Well, that's going to be specific to the type of business you're in, but I'm always a fan, at least in the initial analysis phase, of making sure I have all of the steps listed, even if it's something that we only do sometimes. Or how did step number 11 get into the process? Well, that's something Kevin did 15 years ago. Kevin hasn't been here for 10. But whatever that looks like, that's the value of these Post-it notes on a whiteboard, or a write-on, wipe-off type whiteboard environment, or some of the virtual tools that we've got right now. Spend more time determining exactly what it is our process is designed for right now and how the process is designed, because it's worth the time. And once you've got a complete snapshot of what's going on right now, that's when I can start to say, okay, well, this doesn't make any sense here. Let's eliminate that phase. Let's automate or digitize that particular element of it. But I can't do any of that work until I've got that level of detail. So yeah, I'm always an advocate of getting more up there. At the highest level in the organization, what those people need to know is, okay, I got a problem right there, and I know I've got resources dedicated and accountable to resolve the challenges that we've got.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Richard asks you to expound more on why we don't own the process.
Yeah, happy to expound. The process ownership isn't sexy, it doesn't fit with our titles. It doesn't fit with our vision of our careers and where we're going. But it's interesting. It doesn't matter what level you get to in an organization. You're still going to be responsible for dealing with the problems that come up without process ownership. And in any job description, we typically talk about responsibilities and skills and that type of thing. And we might actually highlight that they need some type of process optimization background or some type of skills in this sort of thing. But actually, articulating and saying that, if it's Subway restaurant, Barry's in charge of the process in my store to make sure that those subs are created inside of at least, they're no more than 3 minutes, and each sub is built to these specifications and it's fresh, right? Nobody's assigned for that. And I don't know why. As I said, the only thing I can think of when I've dug into this in the past is that it's just not interesting enough. So they don't actually build it into job descriptions, which is part of the reason why we're falling short in that area.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Thank you, Usman. Great strategy and presentation. However, in some other industries, how do you find the balance between failing fast, innovation, bottoms-up approach versus defining processes that people need to follow? When do you know where to apply a process for efficiencies?
That's such a good point. The fail fast mentality, and I spent a lot of time in the innovation space, but the fail fast, fail often type mentality is really when we're still developing a service or a product and we're kind of getting a sense of what our offering is starting to look like. I'll start thinking about the process then, but I'm not going to standardize a process, and I'll get back to this in just a second, but I'm not going to standardize it until I'm kind of ready for prime time, until we're actually going to get this out into the market and start serving customers through that particular process. But again, early on in that business model life cycle, it's important to realize that the customers are likely going to change, or we're going to start to serve other people, or their feedback is going to mean that we're changing. So that standardized process that I've defined initially needs to be very something that we tweak and tune, and just because it's standardized doesn't mean it's locked in forever. So it's going to be standardized until we improve it, and then it's standardized again until we improve it again. So that's that whole process. It's a little after all of the innovation side of things, and basically when we think we're ready for prime time, that's when it's got to be standardized.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
There are some great questions here, and we've got 4 minutes till we tell people we're going to be done. There's an interesting question though I want to put to you. Speaking of change, an anonymous person writes, any thoughts or wisdom for how to manage customer expectations within the context of the climate crisis? Meaning the cost of energy is increasing. Certainly, we've all been hearing about inflation, and there's a large transformation underway. How as a company can we better guide our customers on something so significant?
Guiding our customers, right? That's interesting language, and really, I think it's a pretty appropriate mindset, because if our customers are guided and then endorse our particular change in philosophy, that's going to justify some of our activities after the fact to start to move in a particular direction. Shell, Royal Dutch Shell is a they're now a large energy company, and they started off obviously forever in the oil and gas business, and they've been migrating over the last kind of 10 years towards an energy focus. They took a complete market focus and said that we realize the world is changing. We are going to drive more towards, call it an energy focus. They actually put people in charge of thinking about what can go wrong with the strategy. Right now, they've got a guy called Jeremy Bentham, who's their basically, an odd title, but basically he's responsible for thinking about what can go wrong at Shell now. And he's got a very customer focused or market focused type mentality. So how do we train our customers in this new mindset? I think our customers understand the need for it. And I think we train them by telling them how we're going to drive in that particular direction, how we're going to modify our offerings and our services to better take responsibility for what's going on around us. We're not going to be part of the problem, we're going to be part of the solution. And I think for the most part, customers will buy into that. And the customers that don't will leave, that's fine. But I think we're going to keep attracting more customers that do buy into that message. So you'll likely see a bit of a shift in your marketplace as that evolves too.
Okay, interesting. Wow. Well, I apologize to the rest of our audience members whose questions I don't think we're going to have time to get to, because I have to do my ending spiel, which I will do quickly, which is to let our audience know about some opportunities we have for online learning at Smith School of Business through Queen's Executive Education. So those of you who've asked questions that didn't get them answered, here's an opportunity. If you're interested in learning more about how to successfully deliver on your organization's strategy, we've got a 4-day virtual program happening next month called Execution, and it might be just the ticket for you. Takes a deep dive into the executional barriers that could be impeding your results and how to overcome those barriers. Also coming up, Queen's Executive Education is offering a program on innovation and entrepreneurship that will help you realize the creative potential within your group and free up the resources necessary to support new initiatives. And Barry, I understand you are teaching on both of these programs. Do you want to make a plug? Say anything?
Well, it's interesting and maybe a coincidence, maybe not, but the stuff we're talking about today very much is the theme behind what we're doing in both of those programs. So, so if this was of interest, then maybe this is something you want to explore and see if it fits your schedule.
Okay, so for more information, anyone who's interested, have a look at smithqueens.com/exec-ed. Barry, you're a delightful presenter as always. I know our audience has got a lot out of it. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Oh, I forgot to plug our next webinar, which is happening Thursday, November 18th. We're going to be exploring the growing business of people analytics and how that can transform management. So keep your eyes on your inbox for that. Barry Cross, a delight as always. And
thank you, Meredith.
Thank you everyone for watching. From Smith School of Business at Queen's University, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you all next month. Have a nice afternoon, everyone. Bye.